Okay, Dawn of War 4 is on the agenda today. I had the opportunity to play a pre-alpha version of this game, courtesy of Plaion, Deep Silver, and King Art Studios, so big thank you to the devs for including me in this early access look and for sponsoring this video. We're going to be breaking down the Space Marine roster, explaining many of the game's core mechanics as I understand them, and giving my general thoughts and impressions on the limited slice I have played so far. To set the stage, this was a campaign mission scenario battle where Captain Cyrus and the Blood Ravens drop into an active war zone to support an Imperial Guard regiment that is about to be overrun by orcs. And after slaughtering the initial waves, you must construct a base and headquarters while defending against increasingly larger and heavier enemy incursions, striking out to take down encampments, and finally, Gorgut's elite bodyguards and HQ. All the while, the Greenskins are building mighty Gorkanaut walkers comparable to an Imperial Knight. They're freaking huge. It will cause all kinds of havoc if you don't build into heavy armor-piercing troops like the Repulsor Executioner tank with the heavy laser configuration. At one point in the mission, the Imperial Guard and AdMech forces team up alongside an Imperial Knight to help you push the Greenskins base, while a Necron invasion force, led by a monolith, a big floaty pyramid, and canoptic stalkers strike from behind, shooting all kinds of Gauss flares into the rear. Seeing the Necron tier slowly shambling to war under that sickly green glow, melting dudes during their implacable advance was pretty goddamn cool. The mission gets really hectic, battles slowly built into some very large engagements with a lot of troops and explosions happening all over the screen. Definitely a lot going on. Unfortunately, this build was considered pre-alpha, so they didn't want us recording footage from our play session yet because stability, graphical fidelity, and performance weren't all there yet. They warned us of that beforehand, that was to be expected, but it does mean you guys are looking at B-roll footage that was sent to me because I was not allowed to record my own gameplay session yet, and that will make it a bit difficult to show you some of the things I'm talking about. Hopefully, the next reveal will allow us to actually capture our own gameplay. But yeah, to quickly recap yesterday, the Space Marines, Greenskins, AdMech, and Necrons will be the starting 4 playable races in Dawn of War 4, and the plan is for asymmetry between factions to be pushed substantially. Each faction is going to have their own gameplay mechanics, stratagems, and potentially resources that are completely unique to them, or at least are built, maintained, and procured in different ways. Space Marines have a bunch of mechanics unique to them, of course, from the way they can rapid deploy via drop pod to their reserve system, and how they defend captured territory. And for each of these races, the devs are trying to push that power fantasy and special tabletop and lore elements by expressing them in gameplay terms. Space Marines are going to be much more powerful than the orcs on a per model basis. You can feel that immediately when your intercessors with stalker bolt rifles chunk through a shoot-a-boy squad. But naturally, the Greenskins will field many more troops than you possibly can, and once you get into their higher tier units, the playing field is going to even somewhat. The Mega Knobs, Death Dreads, and Gorkanauts can really mess you up. They pack a punch. Base building has returned in Dawn of War 4, as has requisition, power, and population cap, which is quite a bit higher in this game than it is in DAO 1 or DAO 2. I had like a massive repulsor tank, 2 powerful Redemptor dreadnoughts, each with their own weapon loadout, a bunch of TAC Marines and assault squads, some Blade Guard vets and Terminators, and I don't think I even broke 150 pop cap, while the overall pop cap is 300. So maybe too early to read too much into that, but I found it interesting. There were little boxes of power and requisition scattered throughout the map to give you a quick boost if you just ran a unit over them, but rec nodes and power nodes are still going to be your main conflict points, and you want to capture them and build them up. And they can be fortified by bunkers, listening posts, turrets, and all manner of flavorful toys from each faction. Obviously, the more you put into a resource node, the more you're going to get out of it, and the easier it will be to defend it. As far as I could tell, Space Marines do not have servitors or builders at all. You just build what you want once you have enough rec and power to do so. That may change, and it may be different for other races, but in the trailer yesterday when it showed Greenskins base building, I didn't see any builders for them either. So my guess is that just isn't a mechanic in Dawn of War 4. I'll be curious to see how that impacts raiders and skirmish troops, because an important component of early bike rushes and Flayed One's deep strikes and that sort of thing in Dawn of War 1 is to overwhelm an opponent early by dealing economic damage and killing off enemy villagers or builders. Those units don't necessarily kill buildings quickly, but they can quickly snipe out a infantry unit, or they can kill villagers, builders, that sort of thing, and that puts a lot of a pressure on your opponent. So without villagers being a unit, I'm curious if that tactic will be available in other ways. Hopefully it will be. Now, base building has very much returned, I found its interactions with the reinforcement and reserve system of the Space Marines to be very dynamic. Tarantula turrets and listening posts are kind of built the old-fashioned way. You plop them down on a point, and once they're done building, they can help mow down enemies and defend a particular strategic point. But hammerfall bunkers are a new toy that can be dropped anywhere instantaneously, and they can slice through low-tier orc and Gretchen squads like a hot knife through butter. Very helpful tool because your army is small and very elite, and you're encouraged to keep it small because you actually get less resources the more troops you put into your army. You instead want to focus on veterancy. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But yeah, you can't cover enough ground on the map without constantly backtracking to defend against incursions coming from many different angles. The way you get around this is by dropping a hammerfall bunker and a couple drop pods from your reserves into a raid to deal with those backcapping threats while your main force pushes on to take out the bigger encampments. So if some Squighog boys and some Mega Knobs come in from another flank that you're not ready to defend yet, if you have stuff in reserve in your drop pods, you can drop them in to defend a point and also get a hammerfall bunker to help reinforce. And I will say, seeing Terminators deep strike in to mow down an onrushing horde with an assault cannon, while Stormbolter drop pod turrets cut through a swarm, was exactly the power fantasy I wanted to see for an elite Space Marine company. Game's gonna be rated mature, there's all kinds of gore and dismemberment, it's very satisfying even in these early stages, and the weapons really do have some punch to them. Seeing stuff get jibbed doesn't really get old. There is also an in-depth cover system, similar to the Dow 2 version, but less jank and easier to interface with. Bunkers and sandbags and craters are scattered throughout the map, and animations where units will appropriately hunker down into them are all present. Certain active abilities, like Captain Cyrus's turbo penetrator rounds, can pierce cover, and grenades, missile barrages, and overloaded plasma shots can outright ignore it, lobbing over the top to jib the hunkered down inhabitants on the other side. Grenades don't appear to be a skill shot, and I think they happen naturally at appropriate ranges as well, perhaps on some kind of internal cooldown, but they're also an active ability that can be unit targeted, not point targeted, which means you click a group of enemy shooter boys when they're in range and a grenade will land in the middle of their squad, so you don't have to aim it in the same way that you did in Dow 2. In Dow 2, it was ground targeted. Here, it's unit targeted. It'll go directly to the unit. Now, honestly, I think I preferred the Dow 2 skill shots and it being ground targeted. Landing a perfectly timed grenade and wiping a squad of Dire Avengers on retreat path is just about the most satisfying thing you can do in the entire series. But the engagements there were so much smaller in scope and focused only on a handful of squads, and I think that might be why we're kind of leaning away from that here. That level of micro for a single unit in an army of like 15 or 20 squads may not be realistic or even necessary. Time will tell. In addition, I do believe terrain is destructible, although to what extent, I'm not exactly sure. It's not a mechanic I really interacted with all that much beyond noticing it was there, but at least in my matches, when I shot overloaded plasma into a bunker, everything inside would jib and explode, but I'm not sure if the bunker itself would be like completely destroyed or anything. I don't think they were. There is an additional resource which I believe every faction will share called command points that are generated by engaging in combat, building and producing units, and holding resource nodes. They grant access to stratagems over time, which for the orcs look like it'll be Wah or some kind of enrage, get your choppas out, melee steroid type thing, and rocks, of course, to drop a meteor or 17 on your opponent's heads. For the Space Marines, we had access to 3 stratagems. Battle Honors gave a unit a big XP boost, essentially promoting them to a higher rank, presumably increasing their HP and damage, which means veterancy is returning as a mechanic. I got my Plasma Redemptor Dreadnought and Terminators to gold chevrons multiple times throughout multiple battles, and just like the unit cards, I think the XP system is very similar to Total War as well. It goes 3 bronze, 3 silver, then 3 gold chevrons, and I think 3 gold chevrons was level max. The second stratagem was the Thunderhawk Cluster Bomb stratagem. Could be dropped in a line to devastate an advancing horde in a choke point, and Orbital Bombardment could be called in as the final stratagem for a hefty price of command points, which is essentially a sustained volley of randomized orbital lasers that could explode Gorkonauts and scour an entire area of life. Probably not going to be quite as satisfying as the one in Dow 2. If you remember when the beams came down there, you'd see a unit levitate, suspended in midair for like 8-10 seconds before they inevitably exploded. Wasn't quite like that here, but I mean, you could jib an entire horde, and it was very satisfying when it landed flush, and I did kill a Gorkonaut on multiple occasions using the orbital laser. So let's talk the Space Marine unit roster and building recruitment, how all that works. From the Chapel Barracks, you have Infiltrators, which are essentially your scout equivalent now, but they're Primaris Marines. Intercessors, Assault Squad that start on foot but can upgrade to jump packs. Thunderhammer and Plasma Pistol or Power Sword and Hand Flamer upgrades on them. And then we had Eliminators and the Invictor Tactical Warsuit, which is essentially a light Primaris Walker. From the Sanctum, you could get Blade Guard Veterans, Eradicators with Meltas, Terminators, and the Redemptor Dreadnought. The Termies and Dreads especially felt awesome. They absolutely ripped and teared units and split them into chunks when they got hold of them. Frankly, I think the Plasma Dread upgrade is probably the highlight of the entire roster for me. It was super fun to kill stuff with. And from the Armory, you can make Outriders, the Gladiator Reaper Grav Tank, and the Mighty Repulsor Executioner, each with multiple weapon loadouts and upgrades. Now, each of these buildings, the Sanctum, the Chapel Barracks, what have you, they each had separate tech to unlock access to higher tier units and general upgrades for those recruited from that same building. And the Strategium was essentially the overarching tech building that could improve reinforcement times via drop pod, improve storm bolters on drop pods, and buff retreat effectiveness. Oh yeah, retreat is definitely a thing here. So keeping units alive and functional will likely be more important in DAO 4 than it was in at least DAO 3. I'd argue that's going to be very important, that preserving models and taking good engagements should be a core component, because when Space Marine squads feel like dispensable fodder and can be thrown willy-nilly into the meat grinder to be mowed down over and over, I feel like that is a problem. I feel like you're lacking some of the power fantasy and lore elements that make 40k what it is. They don't feel like Space Marines at that point. But reinforcements happen on the battlefield like in DAO 1. You don't need to be back at base to replenish models in a squad like in DAO 2. There are some issues I have with that, honestly. I realize it's an important feature in the original Dawn of War and Definitive Edition of that game, but seeing a Space Marine model just appear out of thin air while his squad is in combat doesn't fully sit right with me. I think it's flavorful for some factions, but there should always be an animation or mechanic that makes that appearance logical, you know what I mean? Like a Necron model crawling out of the earth, or a Terminator model deep striking in via teleport, coming down in drop pods, that sort of thing. When it just materializes out of thin air, especially with an elite army like Space Marines, I'm not sure that feels quite right. The drop pod system is really good, I like it a lot, but yeah, you should have to be near a friendly building or drop pod to reinforce a unit and replace lost models. Do understand though, I say that without a full picture on the balancing or kill time for units at the moment, and that might just be one of those sacrifices on the altar of realism the devs have to make to keep the flow of combat in a good state and as a pure balance decision. Higher tier units and weapons might be powerful enough that if you had to run back to base every single time you lost a single model, you never get anywhere during a push, and in that situation, of course, it may be a necessary sacrifice. You don't want multiplayer games dragging on to an hour and a half because every time you lose an intercessor model, you're just like, oh, I gotta run back to base now. That would suck. Again, this is how it worked in DAO 1. Units, even Space Marines, would materialize out of thin air when reinforcing a squad. People love DAO 1. I've never seen anyone complain about it in DAO 1, so maybe nobody really cares. As for the Terminators, I'd like to see some melee variants as well. I did not see any in this build. I think their only loadouts were Heavy Flamer, Assault Cannon, and the default Storm Bolters, but Lightning Claws and Thunderhammer shield combo will hopefully be in as well. Now, one of the biggest features being added here is a new sync animation system that doesn't just work for kills, but for general combat between squads. So, for example, if a Dreadnought is fighting a group of Storm Boys, the entire squad of Greenskins will be ducking for cover. The Plasma Dread will like shoot at one while a boy model dives for cover, and then stomp on another one. Or if a squad of Blade Guard veterans engages knobs in melee, they will all be parrying and entering sync duels with one another. So it makes the fights look way more dynamic when multiple units are engaged in melee, because they're all doing something. Every model unit is interacting and behaving much more naturally than they otherwise would. In previous games, yeah, they might like swing their rifle, but they would just do that same prefab animation 10, 15 times in a row until a sync kill happens. Now, even when a sync kill isn't occurring, they're still going to be locked into matched combat animations, which I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy looking at from a visual cinematic perspective. You can zoom in real far here with the camera, like Total War style close-ups, cinematic shot style close, which should be awesome if they have even halfway decent replay functionality. Basically, I could do similar things with highlights and sync kill animation edits like I do in Total War battle reports on my channel right now, which has me very excited. And the camera seems to be fully controllable. Changing angles and controlling it with WASD, can zoom in really far, get in hyper close, and keyboard functionality with rebinds and such all seems like it will be there on day one. Personally, I find the combat here to be much more readable than Dawn of War 1 is, and that was after only playing like 10 minutes. The addition of customizable colored health bars and unit icons floating over the top of each unit, and the Total War style unit cards, the UI in general, all came much more naturally to me than Dawn of War Definitive has so far, and I feel like it's a lot easier to keep track of your army and what's happening on the battlefield. That makes sense though, because I come from Total War. I imagine that's not going to be how everyone feels on the topic. For me personally, I felt like battles were very readable and easy to understand pretty much right from the jump. Overall, I found it pretty easy to pick up and play. Fairly intuitive across the board. It had a functional UI, quick and easily accessible tooltips and explanations of what units are and what their upgrades and weapon selections do. So for example, if I wanted to upgrade to a heavy laser on the repulsor tank, it would tell me, hey, this is a very high damage tank and a very high damage weapon loadout against single armored targets. So it's great for quickly dealing with the Gorkonauts or Death Dreads. Just by mousing over, it would immediately give me that information on the right side of my screen. I found that to be very helpful. Graphically, it does have a more cartoony style than DAO 1 or DAO 2, which didn't overly bother me, but I'm surprised they went in that direction because it will absolutely remind some people of DAO 3, which the game clearly does not want to be associated with in any way, shape, or form, right? I feel like they could have easily avoided that straight from the jump, and there are definitely going to be criticisms leveled about gameplay, animations, and color palette looking like DAO 3 to an extent. But for me, I felt like there were more than enough differences here that it felt like its own game, and that it felt like it was blending elements of the prequels together while also forging its own take on combat and general feel. It's a medley, it's a mix. I can recognize things in it from DAO 1, DAO 2, and DAO 3, and I don't really think that's a bad thing. Ultimately, there's really no way I can make that judgment call for you. There are going to be people who hate it, people who love it, people who feel like it's a blend of all the best Dawn of War has to offer, and some who feel like it's just too similar to the parts of the series they dislike to truly enjoy it. For my part, in the limited slice of the game that I played here, I had a lot of fun. I felt like the combat was satisfying and punchy. I felt like the sounds were pretty good. It was glorious mowing down hordes of greenskins with Invictor warsuits and huge battle tanks, which are properly scaled, unlike in DAO 1, where every tank is freaking tiny except the Baneblade. And I felt like the mainline Primaris Marines were pretty tanky and survivable and dealt good damage. That I was encouraged to keep them alive, particularly to make use of that veterancy mechanic, and that at least in this alpha preview, it did not feel like a MOBA to me at all. Take that for what it's worth. I'm excited for this game. I'm fairly happy with what I've played so far. I think there's reasons to be excited for the future of it, but the logical approach, of course, is to temper your expectations because hope is the first step on the road to disappointment. Honestly, I've never really subscribed to that ideal. I do think we as a community can sometimes be overly grognardy and negative, but of course, that's not without reason. It does not feel good to get burned. We have been burned on the past with this series. We'll see how it goes. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. I will be covering Dawn of War 4 throughout its life cycle, I believe. And if it ends up being truly great, which I hope it will be, I hope we get to see even more units and factions moving into the future. I think the foundation is there. I think the gameplay, the core gameplay loop so far is pretty fun. I want to thank the developers for early access and being passionate. Chill lads, and I'll do my best to answer questions in the comment section below. And I will see you all in the next video. Andy Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.